Number 3 is war crimes, right? Or war crimes, right? War crimes. Okay. What are war crimes? Well, they're crimes in war, right? But the idea of saying that they're crimes in war assumes that there is a standard of conduct in war. And there is a standard of conduct in war. There are many different standards of conduct in war. Sort of the universally recognized standard of conduct in war, though it's not always appropriated verbatim, is, as I said, the videos that I've had up before, just war theory, right? This idea of just war. What is proper conduct in war? So a war crime is a violation of that conduct, right? A war crime is a violation of proper conduct within war, right? So that's how we'll define it. It's a violation of proper, right? A violation of proper conduct in war. And there are very, very heavy penalties for violating conduct in war. There are very extreme penalties for violating conduct in war and committing war crimes, right? So a war crime is a violation of conduct in war. And as I said, with respect to just war theory, the example might be non-combatant immunity, right? Non-combatants aren't privy to targeting, right, in war. Non-combatants should not be targeted. Granted, there's going to be, there will be casualties of war, right, for sure. Civilians will die. The death of a civilian as an incidental fact to a bombing of, let's say a weapons or weapons plant, is a casualty. The specific targeting of civilians with the intent to harm these individuals or to kill these individuals, or to torture these individuals, whatever it might be, is a specific prohibition which is subject to persecution and prosecution, right? Both persecution and prosecution. When we're talking about war crimes, we're talking specifically, and I think I've discussed this in also the video on just war theory, is crimes that are mala in se, right? Right? We're talking about crimes that are mala in se. And anytime we're talking about crimes that are mala in se, and that's supposed to be an S, right? Mala in se, these are crimes that are what's sort of classified as evil in themselves. Right? Evil in themselves. Granted, as a philosopher, philosophers have an obsession with ridiculous levels of clarity. So, as a philosopher, I would want to clarify what is meant by evil, right? I don't personally believe that this is a good term for mala in se, right? Evil in themselves. Well, what do we mean by evil? But you guys, we're not going to do that in this discussion, right? In this discussion, just know that mala in se are crimes that are evil in themselves. And we have an idea of what that means, right? Evil for the sake of evil. Torturing is a crime that is evil in itself, right? Let's say torturing without the attempt to garner any type of information, just torturing for kicks, is a bad thing. Mass rape is a crime that is mala in se, a crime that is evil in itself, and so on, right? These crimes are specifically prohibited, obviously by international law, but also prohibited theoretically in the concept of just war theory. And with respect to war crimes, we recognize that these crimes are violations of conduct in war, right? So we're going to see how, because it seems to be the case that though we now might be able to recognize the distinction between crimes against humanity and genocide, it might not be so clear the distinction between war crimes and genocide just yet. In a few minutes, I'll put up a diagram that I constructed to try and clarify some of these points, and you might be able to see more of the distinction between a war crime and an act of genocide. Okay, and that's good. All right, next, number 4 is ethnic cleansing. Ethnic cleansing. There's actually a lot of debate on, is there really a distinction between genocide and ethnic cleansing? I come from the school that there is a fundamental distinction between ethnic cleansing and genocide. If you were to talk to another genocide scholar, he or she might disagree with me, right? Which is fine. Personally, however, I try to make a very clear distinction between my terms, so there's no way that I would say that ethnic cleansing and genocide are one and the same. And what I'm going to do later is to try and show how they're different. Again, this is sort of my interpretation of genocide scholarship, and there are many interpretations of genocide scholarship. This is just my particular brand of sort of interpretation. Anytime we're talking about ethnic cleansing, we're talking about the attempt or the act of deliberately purging or moving people from their native land, right? We're trying to cleanse an area of particular individuals based on this group's ethnicity. How do I say that in sort of terms that we can write down? I'll just read what I have. It is the attempt to purge, and I'll clarify that in a second, or move either through extermination or forced emigration, civilians from their native. Alright, it's a mouthful, right? The attempt, and this is just a definition that I created. Not I created, I didn't create the definition, I sort of, the words, the specific ordering of the words is something that I just put together. There's many different ways to define it. This is just sort of how I'm choosing to define it. Ethnic cleansing is the attempt to purge or move, either through extermination or forced immigration, civilians from their native lands. That's the idea. The question is, what does purging mean? What does it mean to talk about purging? I'm going to do a video, like I'm going to do a few of these lectures on foundational concepts in genocide, foundations of genocide. I'm going to do a more in-detail discussion on the idea of purgation later. I think Martin Shaw does a fabulous idea of talking about what purgation is, what cleansing is. So this is sort of ode to Martin Shaw's interpretation and account. But just sort of briefly, you have sort of the domestic jurisdiction of the state border. You have a group which has been targeted in the population, and we'll just say group X of ethnicity X. And what the state is attempting to do, or if it's not specifically the state, the sort of genocidal orchestrators, those in charge of orchestrating this genocide, this act of genocide, what they're attempting to do is purge group X from the state, right? Move them out of the state. You can either move them out of the state through forced emigration, force them to leave, like leave or die, or you can actually kill them. Either way, you sort of fulfill the end of cleansing, quote unquote, the area. So this idea of cleansing, ethnic cleansing, the word is cleansing is sort of flippant, right? It's actually pejorative because it has absolutely nothing to do with cleaning. In a very perverse sense, ethnic cleansing really means sort of the willful destruction or forced emigration of a population from their native lands to some other place, right? Probably a more fallow, desolate region, right? So that's roughly the idea of ethnic cleansing. Quite obviously, the population is targeted, population X is targeted specifically because of their ethnicity, right? So the population is specifically targeted because of their ethnicity. Obviously, you can see that there's substantial overlap. There could be substantial overlap between genocide and ethnic cleansing. However, again, in a few minutes, I'll put up the final chart, and I'm going to try and make some demarcations between these five concepts. And lastly, we have the idea of mass murder. The idea of mass murder. And I've sort of run out of space, but generally the idea of mass murder is the deliberate killing of 4 or more consecutive individuals, right? Something along those lines, right? So what I've written, the intentional and deliberate extermination or killing of 4 or more consecutive people, right?